Mercenary might just be the most OP Ascendancy going into early access for Path of Exile 2. Hey, I'm Cyclon, and today I want to convince you why I just think that. So, just a few hours ago, ZiggyD has shown us one of the last nodes that we didn't know what they were gonna do for the Witchhunter. We now have a full overview of the Witchhunter Ascendancy, and everything on this Ascendancy just looks absolutely busted. But before going further with the video, it's very important to note, everything I'm gonna be saying here is assumed with the information we currently have, which is subject to change. If not before the edict's entrance or the start of early access, it might change during early access. So if something feels too powerful, GGG has stated if enemies do one-shotting or if enemies are too powerful or something is strong, they're willing to nerf that, but they're also more than willing to nerf anything too powerful that we players find. They're aware that they're gonna be adding some powerful things, and they're more than ready to nerf that powerful things once we discover those, if it's too strong. So keep this in mind while watching this video or any other video talking about things to do in Path of Exile 2. So why is this final node so important? Why is Weapon Master this strong? And the reason Weapon Master is this strong is this weapon sets can be quite powerful. And getting 20 additional passive points is even more insane. We have not seen a node doing this before, but just to give it a sense of scale, Weapon Master looks very, very strong. So this is two distinct passive trees from PoE1. This is just to showcase the potential of this node. It's very important to note that I'm talking about the potentials here, because in Path of Exile 2 we don't yet know what is how important. How important is it to kill the big bosses? How important is it to not die? Well, with having only, if you die in a map, you fail a map, bad. But can we, if we just focus on speed, running 5 maps and then dying in one of the 5 maps in the same time you would otherwise take one map, what's going to be better? We have to see. So we don't know how important it is to survive, how important bossing is, and how important mapping coverage is or mapping speed is. We don't know how strong we're gonna go in these things. So the Ascendancy being highly versatile and adjustable to whatever PoE2 throws at us is very important. Now, looking back at Weapon Master, why is it that powerful? The strongest Ascendancy node we have right now is Polymath. Polymath giving us about 30% more damage for most builds. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, depending on how many masteries you use. So this means that Ascendancy, we assume, gonna give us about 30% more damage, or a big survivability layer, or it's gonna give us a big quality of life, like Tailwind, for example. Just big speed, meaning damage, and quality of life. Now, having 20 passive points is even better, because, well, let's say a good node gives us between 5 and 10% more damage. Or here we have 5%, here we have one with 10%, here we have one with 10%, so they just give us a good chunk of damage. So if we just assume that with these 20 weapon set skill points we're gonna get, we can get 5 additional notables that give us at minimum 5% damage. That's already 25% damage. But we're not limited to that. It's weapon set points, so we can use them for damage, we can use them for survivability, we can use them for quality of life. And when weapon swap, we can use them for something entirely different. So we have maybe one weapon swap with a sword and a shield, focusing on survivability, or then we have a second shot with a crossbow, basically guns, focusing on grenades and shooting down bosses for damage. Or we have maybe one for bows, one for crossbows. Or we have 2 crossbows, one focusing on grenades, the other one focusing on the crossbow ammunition. I don't know yet, but having the potential for this versatility is really, really great and really, really powerful. Just being able to adjust to whatever throws the game at us is going to be very powerful, and the passive tree and Ascendancies in PoE2 look both very powerful, very insane, and just being able to take more nodes on the passive tree will be really great. So sorry, I already jumped down one. To show this one last thing, these are 2 distinct passive trees in PoE1. One is an elemental arrow or elemental hit spectrum or lightning arrow bow deadeye. The other one is a peacock of bouncing, viper strike. Actually swap to the viper strike or peacock of bouncing pathfinder. So both trees, if we actually swap to peacock of bouncing, that makes sense. Both trees use a very distinct core, using the dexterity high trait or the high wave with dexterity nodes, reservation, life, quality of life nodes, spell suppression, mana, leech, whatnot. Those are commonly used. But then we have distinct nodes like poison damage or flask effect on one, and the other one using crit chance and bow damage and projectile damage. So we can swap those distinct nodes very easily while keeping the same core tree. And this is why Weapon Master is the node that made me, who already considered, maybe I want to go Mercenary, maybe I want to go Monk, maybe I want to go Sorceress or Witch. Now it's just, I have to go Mercenary. I'm gonna have bows, I'm gonna have crossbows, which again are basically guns. I'm gonna have grenades, I'm gonna have the best versatility I've ever seen in an Ascendancy. Now this is just one node. I've already talked a lot about the potential of the Ascendancy with just one node. Let's take a look at the other nodes that are even more insane. We have packages for single target, packages for survivability, and packages for coverage. So we have, again, just massive versatility in this Ascendancy. Let's take a look at the bossing. Well, we could just pick up Witchbane and No Mercy. Witchbane gives enemies concentration. Now, the way this concentration sounds, because we can break concentration if we hit on it equal 100% of damage dealt. So they have 40% of the max life as concentration. If we hit them enough, we break the concentration and they have this concentration broken. Now we don't know exactly what it does. I think at least I haven't remembered seeing what it does exactly, but what it sounds like, if once the concentration is broken, they cannot cast any big spells or big attacks. And this means when we have a big boss fight where he's charging up like his massive attack, let's take an example, the Maven explosion that the brain does every 30% damage dealt, or every third of the life, you just break it and it doesn't happen. No, you don't need to dodge it. Now you don't need to time a dodge. Or imagine skipping the zeroing extra ball phase just by damaging him enough. That sounds amazing. And this is what I think Witchbane does. And if we add No Mercy to it, we even do more damage based on the missing concentration. Now it sounds like that once we break the concentration fully, it's gonna take them a moment to fully regain concentration. So it's increase in damage, and then it drops again, then increases again, then it drops again as we continue to hit the enemy. But this is going to be perfect for us because the Witchhunter has access to grenades. It's going to be on the section of the tree that has easy access to grenades. So we chuck a bunch of grenades on the enemy. The enemy takes the massive damage. No Mercy goes on just even more damage. And then while we are recovering our grenades cooldown, we maybe have our crossbow or we have some bow. And we just keep hitting the enemy for a bit so they don't gain a massive recovery of their concentration. They just recover maybe a little bit of it, and we chuck it down, already preparing our next set of grenades to burst the enemy away again. But again, this is just 2 more nodes. We have even more. We have Pitiless Killer and Decimating Strike. Pitiless Killer gives us Culling Strike, which I get to in a moment, but Decimating Strike is the first big thing. We can just chuck the enemy for a massive portion of their life. Now the bosses the pinnacle bosses just looking insanely strong and tanky. Being able to take 5, 10, 20, or most 30% damage life of them just away just by being there is already gonna be really big. This means that they are way easier to be killing, because once they're in low life, the small nodes leading up to that gives us increased damage with hits against enemies that are on low life. And this is 35% increased damage. That is a lot of increase. Normally we have like 10% on the small node. Those Ascendancy nodes with 35% increased damage, that's a big chunk of additional damage. If the second node does the same, that's 70% damage, increased damage once they're on half-life, if low life works like in PoE1, which is another variable, but again, versatility and the potential to adapt is great. So we have the big chunk initially, then we have maybe No Mercy and Witchbane to chuck the enemies down to, like, let's say 30-20% life, and then our Culling Strike gets interesting. Culling Strike in PoE2 is no longer static. It's not going to be 10%, or if you have a Slayer on the Ascendancy, it's 20%. Nope. It's going to be adjustable based on what we are fighting. So a unique enemy will have a 5% culling, then rare is going to be at 10, imagine I have more hands, magic is going to be at 20, and white enemy is going to be at 30 life. 30%. So that normal maps, we have a very easy time culling our enemies by just having Decimating Strike, then hitting them for a bit, and then cull happens and they're gone. And uniques are going to be having a lower culling threshold, but we have nodes on the tree that increase the effectiveness. So if we increase the effectiveness just by 25%, or by 50%, we're gonna go from 5% cull to 7.5 cull. And with 25, it's gonna be what, 6 something. So we can increase the culling range, meaning that we can cull earlier, and by those big enemies, these big pinnacle enemies, the earlier we can cull, the better it's gonna be. So this is gonna be another great package for single target. And then we have, of course, also coverage and survivability. And coverage gives us Zealous Inquisition. Zealous Inquisition gives us a chance to explode enemies for their whole life as fist damage. Now what this means is that in those big white packs, that let's assume are like 10 to 20 enemies, based on what we've seen, we have Decimating Strike, chucking them to 70% life. Then we maybe hit them once, get them to 50, damage against lower life enemies takes an effect. We do another hit, they go down to 30, culling happens, and then explode happens, and the whole pack explodes. Because the explosion just needs to get them again to like the 30% life range, and then they die. And being 100% life as fist damage means we can, if we scale fist damage or we convert fist damage, we can do that to that as well. So it just sounds very, very powerful in terms of clear. Combining with Decimating Strike and Pitiless Killer, just a really amazing clear package. But we also have survivability. Instead of, let's say, picking up Zealous Inquisition or maybe some damage, we sacrifice a bit of it and we instead get some survivability with Obsessive Rituals and Ceremonial Ablution. Now, in PoE2, Ascendancy granted skills can be supported by support gems, meaning the Sorcery Ward is a skill that we're going to be able to scale. So we have we do sacrifice half of our armored evasion rating, but based on what we've seen in current PoE1, and I assume this applies to PoE2 as well, getting armored evasion rating from equipment, because flasks are going to be gone, auras are going to be harder to get, we're going to have a lot of armored evasion from gear. So I think we can still expect to get to like 20-30k evasion and maybe 10k armor very easily. And that is with halving, based on, again, what I've known in PoE1, the numbers we can reach. And then we have Ceremonial Ablution. If this is not enough, with just having Sorcery Ward, we can double down on it, gain increased recovery, faster recovery, and increased effectiveness. Now, what does Sorcery Ward do? Sorcery Ward gives us a buff that gives about every 10 seconds, so if it's 50% faster, it should be... No, this... I don't know, my brain just isn't mathing it. 50% faster sounds like it should be 5 seconds. But also math says that 5 seconds should be 200 speed, and 150 speed, which 50% faster is, should be 7.5 seconds. So I'm gonna stick with 7.5. So every 7.5 seconds, assuming that at the moment we get it, it gets instantly depleted, we're gonna get a shield. Now this shield is gonna be taking all the elemental damage before it hits us from hits. AoE we want to dodge anyway. Those AoE attacks seem like they are always supposed to be massive damage, so there will be some attacks we always want to dodge regardless. But those hits like that we get during a map, or maybe small hits during a boss fight that could just be annoying, Sorcery Ward will get those covered. Now it takes elemental damage up to 30% of our armor evasion rating. So if we have, let's say, let's be on a small number, just 10k evasion rating, And 3k armor will be a 4k elemental shield. 4k is quite a big number. So this will take a lot of the damage from hits. Now again, we can apply here maybe increased effectiveness support or cooldown rate support, so we have this more often. The best comparison we have to this, if we go back here, is Bastion of Elements giving us Primal Aegis. And this is 75% flat elemental damage per notable skills, and this one scales with Armored Evasion, which we want to scale anyway for survivability. So the potential of Sorcery Ward being massive survivability is really, really big. But again, all of this we will have to see based on what PoE2 gives. But just having Weapon Master, having Culling Strike, having Decimating Strike, having the Concentration, having Explosion, and having something against elemental damage gives this Ascendancy hyper flexibility and isn't locking us in. We don't need to go minions on this, we don't need to go spells on this, we don't need to go crossbows or grenades on this, we don't need to go bolts on this or melee on this. We can take whatever is the most powerful based on the passive points that we have and what we can grab on the tree and on gems and on gear. And this allows us to be highly flexible, adjusting to whatever the game throws at us and whatever we need to defeat what the game gives us. All this being said, if you enjoyed this video, I would highly appreciate a thumbs up or maybe a subscribe if you haven't yet. Would really help me out, would help this video out. That means it can get to more people. This will be helpful too. All that being said, have a wonderful day and I'll be seeing you either at launch or on my next video. Goodbye.